What if the most watched show in television history, almost never aired, was settled in just 8 nights to get it out of the way, and involved a teenage unknown who outran an NFL star during filming? From plagiarism scandals to Vegas casinos going empty, Roots wasn't just groundbreaking television. It was a cultural phenomenon wrapped in bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets that will change how you see this iconic miniseries. Fact 1. ABC expected it to flop spectacularly. Here's something that sounds absolutely unbelievable today. But back in 1977, the executives at ABC were genuinely terrified that Roots was going to be one of the biggest disasters in television history. They were so convinced this miniseries would fail that they made a decision no network had ever made before, scheduling all 8 episodes to air on consecutive nights over just 1 week in January. This wasn't some brilliant marketing strategy or an innovative way to keep viewers hooked. It was actually a panic move designed to cut their losses as quickly as possible and get the show off the air before it could damage their ratings during the important February sweeps period. The network had plenty of reasons to be nervous about a 12-hour miniseries focusing on the brutal realities of slavery in America. Most miniseries at that time aired once or twice a week, spreading out over several weeks or even months to build anticipation and give audiences time to discuss each episode. But ABC programming chief Fred Silverman and his team looked at Roots and saw nothing but trouble ahead. They worried that white audiences wouldn't tune in to watch a story centered on black characters and the horrors of enslavement, and they feared the graphic violence and emotional intensity would drive viewers away in huge numbers. Years later, network executives openly admitted their reasoning. The Museum of Broadcast Communications documented how ABC essentially wanted to get Roots out of the way in a hurry, because they genuinely believed nobody would stick with the story if it dragged on for weeks. The irony is almost painful. This format, born entirely from fear and low expectations, accidentally created one of the most successful television events in history, with over 130 million Americans tuning in. Fact 2. LeVar Burton outran O.J. Simpson. One of the most amusing behind-the-scenes moments from Roots involved a foot race that never should have happened between a 19-year-old college student and one of the most physically gifted athletes in professional football. The scene called for O.J. Simpson, who played a character named Katie Touré, to chase down young Kunta Kinte during a crucial moment in the first episode. Simpson was at the absolute peak of his athletic career at the time, still an active player in the National Football League, so catching a teenage actor should have been simple and straightforward. But LeVar Burton had other ideas. During the first take of the chase sequence, Burton completely ignored the blocking instructions the director had carefully laid out, which specified exactly where and when Simpson was supposed to catch him. Instead, when the camera started rolling, Burton took off running at full speed with no intention of letting Simpson catch up. The young actor later admitted he basically just ran as fast as he could, and the result was both hilarious and embarrassing for everyone involved. Simpson couldn't catch him despite being a professional athlete in peak physical condition. Director David Green was absolutely furious with Burton for wasting everyone's time and money, scolding him in front of the cast and crew for his unprofessional behavior. The whole production had to shut down while Simpson caught his breath, taking a full 10-minute break to recover from the unexpected sprint. They eventually reshot the entire sequence with Burton following the choreography as planned, but the story became legendary on set. Burton shared this memory years later on the 44th anniversary of Roots, laughing about how the experience taught him an important early lesson about respecting the filmmaking process. Fact 3. It was Burton's first professional audition. The casting of young Kunta Kinte turned out to be one of the most crucial decisions for the entire miniseries, and incredibly, the role went to someone who had never auditioned for anything professional in his entire life. LeVar Burton was just 19 years old and studying theater at the University of Southern California when he showed up for his very first professional audition, walking into a room full of experienced casting directors with absolutely no idea what he was getting himself into. He had never stood in front of a camera for a professional production before, never worked on a real film or television set, and had zero experience navigating the competitive world of Hollywood auditions. The date of his screen test is permanently burned into Burton's memory, March 27, 1976, which he describes as one of the few days in his life that he can recall with perfect clarity. The scene they asked him to read was set in the hold of a slave ship, with his character having a conversation with a wrestler, and something about Burton's raw, honest performance convinced the producers that this unknown college student could carry one of the most important roles in television history. What makes this story even more remarkable is who Burton found himself working alongside on his very first day as a professional actor. When he arrived on set, the legendary Cicely Tyson was playing his mother, and Maya Angelou was cast as his grandmother, two absolute giants of American theater and film. Burton later recalled that it should have been completely intimidating to work with such established talent, but he was so focused on understanding who Kunta Kinte was and what the character was feeling that he stayed laser-locked on the performance without getting overwhelmed by the star power surrounding him. Fact 4. Vegas casinos nearly emptied out. There's a famous saying that nothing stops the casinos in Las Vegas, but Roots managed to do exactly that during its 8-night run in January of 1977. The gambling floors, which are specifically designed to keep people playing 24 hours a day with no clocks and no windows, suddenly found themselves with far fewer players than usual as guests abandoned the slot machines and card tables to rush back to their hotel rooms. This was completely unprecedented in a city built on the idea that the action never stops and the money keeps flowing no matter what's happening in the outside world. John Amos, who played the adult version of Kunta Kinte and earned an Emmy nomination for his performance, didn't fully grasp just how massive the cultural impact of Roots had become until he heard about what was happening in Vegas. In an interview years later, he explained that the moment he realized the show was reaching enormous audiences was when people told him that the casinos were practically empty during the broadcast hours. He specifically remembered hearing that the gambling activity had dropped so dramatically that it looked like the casinos had actually closed down, which is something that simply doesn't happen in Las Vegas under normal circumstances. The fact that people were willing to walk away from blackjack tables, poker games, and slot machines to watch a television program told everyone involved with Roots that they had created something far bigger than just another miniseries. Casino operators and entertainment industry insiders alike recognize this as a genuine cultural moment, the kind of shared national experience that was becoming increasingly rare even in the 1970s when there were only 3 major television networks competing for viewers. Fact 5. Alex Haley paid $650,000 in plagiarism settlement. The incredible success of Roots as both a book and a miniseries was overshadowed by a major legal controversy that erupted just 1 year after the show aired. In 1978, an author named Harold Corlander filed a lawsuit in federal court claiming that Alex Haley had copied substantial portions of his 1967 novel called The African when writing Roots. Corlander's book told the story of an African boy captured by slave traders, his horrific journey across the Atlantic on a slave ship, and his struggle to maintain his cultural identity on an American plantation, which sounds remarkably similar to the early sections of Roots for good reason. The lawsuit identified 81 specific passages where Corlander argued that Haley had copied language, plot points, character details, and entire situations directly from The African. The case went to trial and became increasingly damaging for Haley as evidence mounted during 6 weeks of courtroom proceedings. Columbia University professor Michael Wood submitted an expert witness report stating that the evidence of copying was clear and irrefutable, noting that the similarities were both significant and extensive throughout the work. Just before the judge was about to deliver a verdict, Haley agreed to settle the case out of court on December 14, 1978. He paid Corlander $650,000, which would be worth approximately $2.5 million in today's money, and released a public statement acknowledging and regretting that various materials from The African had found their way into his book Roots. Despite this admission and the substantial financial settlement, the Pulitzer Prize Board never revoked the special award they had given Haley in 1977, and Roots maintained its cultural significance even as questions lingered about how much of the story was original work. Fact 6. It holds the Emmy nomination. When the Emmy nominations were announced for the 1977 television season, Roots absolutely shattered every record that existed at the time and set a benchmark that has never been broken in the nearly 5 decades since. The miniseries received a staggering 37 Emmy nominations across all categories, which remains the all-time record for any television program to this day. No show before or after has managed to accumulate that many nominations in a single year, making Roots not just a cultural phenomenon, but also an unprecedented achievement in the history of television awards. What makes this accomplishment even more remarkable is that Roots became the first show in Emmy history to receive at least 20 major nominations, earning 21 in the most prestigious categories alone. The remaining 16 nominations came from the creative arts and technical categories, recognizing everything from cinematography and editing to costume design and sound mixing. This meant that nearly every single person who worked on the production received recognition from the Television Academy, which almost never happens even for the most acclaimed programs. Perhaps most impressively, Roots achieved another historic first by earning nominations in every single acting category that existed at the time. The miniseries had 13 acting nominations total, which tied the record that had been set just 1 year earlier by Rich Man, Poor Man. The cast members found themselves competing against each other in several categories, with Louis Gossett Jr. ultimately winning the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor over his fellow Roots castmates John Amos, LeVar Burton, and Ben Vereen. Out of those 37 total nominations, Roots took home 9 Emmy Awards on the night of the ceremony, cementing its status as one of the most honored productions in television history. Fact 7. Quincy Jones had writer's block. The musical score for Roots should have been a straightforward assignment for Quincy Jones, who was already one of the most successful and prolific composers in Hollywood by 1977. But something unexpected happened that nearly derailed the entire production. Jones had been hired to compose the music for the complete miniseries, a prestigious project that would have added another major accomplishment to his already impressive resume. However, as the January premiere date got closer and closer, Jones found himself unable to deliver the work he had promised, missing deadline after deadline, while the producers grew increasingly worried. Producer Stan Margulies eventually realized they had a serious crisis on their hands when Jones still hadn't completed a main theme for the show, with just 3 weeks left before the first episode was scheduled to air. The network desperately needed music for their advertising campaigns and promotional materials, but Jones had fallen into some kind of creative block that prevented him from finishing the score. In a last-minute panic, Margulies called composer Gerald Fried and asked him to step in and rescue the project. Fried later explained the situation in interviews, describing how Jones had managed to compose only about 56% of the music for Episode 1 before the writer's block stopped his progress completely. Fried had to work at an incredibly fast pace to create the iconic main theme that audiences hear during the opening credits, which is actually called the mural theme, and then finish the remaining portions of the first episode that Jones had left incomplete. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, both composers ended up winning Emmy Awards for their work on that first episode, with Fried also receiving an additional nomination for his score on the 8th and final episode. Fact 8. An airplane trail appears in the sky. Even the most carefully produced historical dramas can fall victim to anachronistic mistakes that slip past editors and make it into the final version that millions of viewers watch, and Roots has one particularly glaring example that sharp-eyed audiences have spotted over the years. During Episode 2 of the miniseries, there's an intense and dramatic scene where the enslaved Africans aboard the slave ship Lord Ligonier attempt a violent rebellion against their captors. The sequence is meant to be set in 1767 during the Atlantic crossing, a time when the only things that should be visible in the sky are clouds, birds, and maybe the occasional seabird following the vessel. However, if you look carefully at the background during the fight scene, you can clearly see a white contrail streaking across the sky exactly like the ones left behind by modern jet airplanes flying at high altitude. This is the kind of detail that completely breaks the historical illusion, because contrails are created by water vapor condensing in the cold air behind aircraft engines, a phenomenon that obviously didn't exist in the 18th century. The trail is visible for several seconds during the action, which means multiple people during the editing process had the opportunity to catch this mistake and either reshoot the scene or digitally remove it in post-production. The fact that this anachronism made it into the broadcast version suggests just how rushed the production schedule must have been, with editors and directors working under enormous time pressure to finish all 8 episodes. In the decades since Roots first aired, this airplane contrail has become one of those famous movie mistakes that fans love to point out, similar to the car visible in the background of a chariot race or a wristwatch worn by a medieval knight. Fact 9. Toby became a baby name killer. One of the most brutal and emotionally devastating scenes in the entire miniseries had an unexpected real-world consequence that affected baby naming trends for decades afterward. In Episode 3, there's a scene where Kunta Kinte repeatedly tries to escape from the plantation where he's enslaved, and after his final recapture, the overseer decides to break his spirit once and for all by forcing him to accept his slave name. Kunta is tied to a post and whipped viciously by another enslaved man who has been ordered to continue the beating until Kunta says his new name is Toby instead of his birth name, Kunta Kinte. The scene is incredibly powerful and difficult to watch, with Kunta refusing over and over again while the lashes continue to fall across his back, blood running down as he struggles to maintain his identity and dignity in the face of unimaginable cruelty. When he finally breaks down and says the name Toby just to make the torture stop, it's one of the most heartbreaking moments in television history because viewers understand that he's been forced to give up a fundamental part of who he is. The cultural impact of this scene was so profound that the name Toby began falling out of favor almost immediately after Roots aired. Parents who might have considered Toby a friendly and approachable name suddenly associated it with enslavement, forced submission, and the violent erasure of identity. The decline was sharp and measurable starting in the late 1970s, turning what had been a reasonably popular choice into a name that many families actively avoided. Interestingly, the opposite happened with the name Kunta, which saw a surge in popularity as parents chose it to honor the character's strength and resistance. Fact 10. TV's most beloved dads played slavers. The casting decisions for Roots involved a calculated strategy that might seem strange at first but made perfect sense, given the network's anxiety about how white audiences would react to the miniseries. ABC executives and the producers made a deliberate choice to cast some of the most beloved and trusted white actors on television in the roles of slaveholders and slave traders, essentially putting America's favorite television fathers into positions as the villains of the story. Robert Reed, who played the warm and understanding Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, was cast as Dr. William Reynolds, a plantation owner. Ralph Waite, known as the kind and moral John Walton Sr. on The Waltons, played another slaveholder. Lorne Greene, the wise and protective Ben Cartwright from Bonanza, took on the role of yet another slave owner. The reasoning behind these casting choices was surprisingly cynical, but arguably effective. The Museum of Broadcast Communications documented how the network specifically selected familiar television actors like Lorne Greene to reassure white audiences who might otherwise have been uncomfortable watching a story centered entirely on the Black American experience. The idea was that seeing these trusted father figure actors would make viewers feel safe enough to keep watching even as the miniseries depicted the brutal realities of enslavement. Other beloved television personalities were also cast against type in similar roles, including Chuck Connors from The Rifleman, Burl Ives, and Sandy Duncan. The only exception to this pattern was Ed Asner, who played a slave ship captain but was given a more conflicted and conscience-stricken character who struggled with the morality of his trade, a figure that didn't even exist in Alex Haley's original novel, but was created specifically to give white audiences a sympathetic entry point into the story. Fact 11. Field slave Kizzy had manicured nails. Historical accuracy in period dramas often comes down to paying attention to small details that viewers might not consciously notice, but that help maintain the illusion of authenticity. And Roots made a particularly noticeable mistake with one of its main characters. Kizzy, who is Kunta Kinte's daughter and plays a central role in the middle episodes of the miniseries, is shown working as a field slave on a plantation, which means she would be spending her days doing backbreaking manual labor like picking cotton, hoeing fields, and handling rough agricultural tools under brutal conditions that would absolutely destroy anyone's hands. Despite this reality, viewers who paid close attention noticed that Kizzy appears throughout her scenes with long, perfectly shaped, and beautifully manicured fingernails that look like they just came from a modern nail salon. This is the kind of continuity error that completely contradicts what we know about the historical reality of field work during the era of enslavement. Women who performed hard physical labor from sunrise to sunset would have had short, broken nails with dirt permanently embedded under them, along with calluses, cuts, and other damage that comes from constant exposure to rough conditions without any of the hand care products or protections we take for granted today. The mistake is especially jarring because the production team went to such great lengths to create authentic-looking costumes, sets, and props that reflected the harsh realities of plantation life. Someone in the makeup or continuity department should have caught this detail before filming began, or at the very least during the editing process when they had the opportunity to reshoot or find creative camera angles that kept the actress's hands out of frame during close-up shots. Fact 12. Whipping scene needed. 2 takes. The scene where Kunta Kinte is whipped until he accepts his slave name remains one of the most powerful and difficult-to-watch moments in television history. And it turned out to be just as traumatic for the young actor filming it as it was for audiences watching at home. LeVar Burton, who was still a teenager during production and had never worked on a professional film set before Roots, found himself facing one of the most emotionally and physically demanding sequences an actor could be asked to perform. The scene required him to be tied to a post while another actor pretended to whip him, repeatedly with special effects creating the illusion of blood running down his back as Kunta refuses again and again to say the name Toby. Burton later admitted in interviews that the first attempt to film this sequence was a complete failure because he simply could not relax enough to be fully present in the scene. The psychological weight of what the moment represented, combined with the physical discomfort of being restrained and the intensity of the performance required, created a level of stress that prevented him from delivering the take that the director needed. He was so tense and unable to let go of his own anxiety that the scene just didn't work on camera, lacking the emotional authenticity that would make it devastating for viewers. The production had to stop and give Burton time to compose himself before attempting the sequence again, which meant putting the entire cast and crew on hold while the young actor prepared mentally and emotionally for a second try. The version that eventually made it into the final cut came from that second attempt, proving that sometimes the most memorable performances require actors to push through genuine psychological difficulty. Fact 13. The slave cabins had mysterious lighting. Filmmakers working on historical dramas face a constant challenge when it comes to lighting interior scenes, because they need to make sure actors are visible to the camera while also maintaining the illusion that characters are living in a time period without modern electric lights. Roots struggled with this problem in several scenes set inside the slave quarters, creating a situation that breaks the historical authenticity once you notice it. The interior of Kunta Kinte's cabin and other slave dwellings are shown with bright, even illumination that allows viewers to see every detail of the actors' faces and the surrounding environment, which is exactly what good cinematography requires for a television production. The problem is that there are no visible light sources anywhere in these scenes that could possibly explain where all this illumination is coming from. The cabins don't have candles burning on tables, no oil lanterns hanging from the ceiling or sitting in corners, and obviously no electric light bulbs or any other anachronistic fixtures that might accidentally appear in frame. In the real historical period that Roots depicts, enslaved people would have had extremely limited access to candles or lamp oil, both of which were expensive commodities that plantation owners rationed carefully or denied entirely to the people they enslaved. This means that nighttime scenes inside slave cabins would have been almost completely dark, except for perhaps a small fire in a hearth if the cabin had one, with people's faces barely visible in the dim flickering light. The studio lighting that was necessary to make the scenes work for television created an impossible situation where these impoverished living spaces somehow have perfect visibility despite the complete absence of any period-appropriate light sources, a detail that becomes increasingly noticeable once viewers start looking for it. Fact 14. 100 million watched the finale live. The final episode of Roots, which aired on January 30th, 1977, achieved viewership numbers that are almost impossible to comprehend in today's fragmented media landscape where audiences are split across hundreds of streaming services and cable channels. According to Nielsen Media Research, 100 million Americans tuned in to watch the conclusion of Kunta Kinte's family story, representing more than half of the entire United States population at that time. This massive audience made the Roots finale the second most watched series finale in the history of American television, when you exclude sporting events like the Super Bowl, and it still holds that position nearly 5 decades later. To put this achievement in perspective, the total population of the United States in 1977 was approximately 221 million people, which means that roughly 45% of every single person in the country, including babies and children who weren't watching television, saw the final episode. When you calculate the percentage based only on television households, the numbers become even more staggering. An estimated 85% of all television homes watched at least part of the miniseries across its 8-night run, with the finale capturing the largest single-night audience. The series as a whole attracted between 130 million and 140 million total viewers when you count everyone who watched any portion of the broadcast, and the last 7 episodes each averaged 80 million viewers per night. The only scripted television series finale that has ever beaten Roots in total viewership was the final episode of Massick in 1983, which attracted 106 million viewers. Fact 15. The wrong flag flew on the slave ship. Historical accuracy enthusiasts and naval history experts spotted a significant error in the scenes aboard the slave ship Lord Ligonier, which is the vessel that transports Kunta Kinte across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa to America in 1767. The ship is shown flying the White Ensign, which is a white flag with a red cross of St. George and the Union Jack in the upper corner. But this flag was reserved exclusively for ships of the Royal Navy and had been since the flag system was established. The Lord Ligonier was supposed to be a British merchant vessel engaged in the slave trade, which means it should have been flying the Red Ensign instead. The Red Ensign, which features a red background with the Union Jack in the corner, had been the official flag for British merchant ships since 1674, nearly a full century before the time period depicted in Roots. This distinction between naval, vessels, and commercial ships was taken extremely seriously by the British maritime authorities, and a merchant ship flying the White Ensign would have been committing a serious violation of naval regulations that could result in penalties or even seizure of the vessel. The flag choice matters because it reflects either on the ship's official status or on the historical research done by the production team. This kind of detail might seem minor to casual viewers who aren't familiar with the intricacies of British maritime flag systems, but for historians and sailing enthusiasts, it's the equivalent of showing a character in 1767 wearing a wristwatch or using a smartphone. The props department presumably had access to research materials about 18th century British ships, which makes the error particularly puzzling since the correct flag would have been just as easy to obtain and display.